Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the distinguished DNAs and other participants of this webinar. I would like to thank you for your interest in participating to this important webinar on the implementation of the Rotterdam Convention. My name is Suman Sharma, working in the Secretariat of Basel Convention, UNEP part of the Rotterdam Convention and the Stockholm Convention. I would like to welcome you in this important webinar focus to discuss on the importance of submitting import responses for the success of Rotterdam Convention. With the adoption of Rotterdam Convention on prior informed consent procedure on certain hazardous chemicals and pesticides in international trade in 1998, this legally binding agreement came into force from 2004 for those first 50 parties. Today, there are 164 parties to this convention, and there are 52 chemicals listed under Annex 3 of the convention. All 164 parties have an obligation of submitting the import responses on all these 52 chemicals to the Secretariat. A large number of parties have yet to submit their import responses on chemicals listed under this convention. Import responses from the parties are the foundation stones of the implementation of the convention and the entire PIC procedure. Import responses received by the Secretariat are shared through PIC circulars, which are published twice every year, and also on the website of the convention in order to facilitate the exchange of information. More on the situation, how it works, how important it is, and more will be elaborated by my colleague, Mr. Alexander Mihailovsky. And I am very happy to share with you that we have today with us the DNA of Serbia, Ms. Suzana Andrejevic, who will share her experience on the national procedure relating to the Article 10, which is about the import response. Before giving the floor to Alec, let me quickly inform you that the total duration of this workshop will be around 1 hour, and you will have opportunity to ask your question after each presentation. You can raise your hand to take the floor after the presentation is done, or use the chat box anytime to ask your questions. Thank you. Over to you, Alec.
Thank you, Suman. Thank you for these introductory words, and good morning or good afternoon to all the colleagues, participants, DNAs, and other national stakeholders, observers. I saw in the chat box that we have observers as well. Welcome, and thank you for joining to this webinar, which will address one very important aspect of the convention, and actually that's one of the most important provisions of the convention. Basically, prior informed consent procedure and import responses for chemicals that are listed in the Annex 3. Okay, my slides are again, my computer is getting blocked and my slides are not moving. Let me see, my apologies. Okay, it got reactivated somehow. So under the Rotterdam Convention, we have two main provisions. And the one that we're going to address today is the prior informed consent procedure. And the other one is, as we already know and already mentioned by Suman, is the information exchange. And actually the information exchange itself, it's embedded and is part of the prior informed consent procedure itself. Or we can say that prior informed consent procedure in itself consists information exchange. So in terms of prior informed consent procedure, there are two key stages that are part of this procedure. In the first stage, countries are supposed to submit import responses or import decisions in accordance to Article 10. And in the stage 2, it's following up on importing and exporting countries' responsibilities. Importing countries' responsibilities are followed up and they're explained in the Article 10 of the Convention, where the exporting parties' responsibilities are explained in the Article 11 of the Convention. So in terms of what does it mean, prior informed consent procedure? Basically, through the PIC procedure or through the prior informed consent procedure, the Convention is facilitating the informed decision-making process by the countries on the import of chemicals that are listed in the Annex 3. That means it refers only to these PIC, so-called PIC chemicals. And in the same time, through the PIC procedure, the Convention is ensuring compliance with this import decision by the exporting parties as provided in the Article 11 of the Convention text. So in the Convention, in the Annex 3 of the Convention text, we have 52 chemicals in total listed in Annex 3. And for these 52 chemicals in total, we are expecting 52 import responses from the parties submitted, because we have 35 pesticides, which includes 3 severely hazardous pesticide formulations. We have 16 industrial chemicals, and we have 1 chemical that is listed in both categories. That's TBT compounds that are listed in both pesticide category and industrial chemicals category. And we are expecting import decision for this chemical submitted in both categories. In terms of the operational aspect of the PIC procedure, we have 3 key elements. The first one is the decision guidance documents, DGDs. The second one, already mentioned, import responses. And the third one is the PIC circular. So I will now go through all of them one by one. So you basically refresh your knowledge and your memory about these important elements of the PIC procedure. And of course, the focus will be the second one, which is submission of import responses. So the decision guidance document is referred in Article 7 of the Convention. And basically for each chemical that the Chemical Review Committee has decided to recommend for listing into Annex 3, it prepares so-called draft decision guidance documents. And this draft decision guidance document is initially adopted at CRC level, and then it goes into the COP, conferences of the parties, where it's being approved by the conferences of the parties. And with that, the chemical is getting listed into the Annex 3. Afterwards, the decision guidance document is distributed to all the countries as part of the informed decision-making process on the future imports on behalf of the parties. And basically, the Secretariat is distributing it, the decision guidance document, to the parties as soon as the conferences of the parties adopts and approves the listing of the chemical into Annex 3, and gives 9 months. The Convention text provides 9 months period for the parties to respond and to submit import decision to the Secretariat. And with that, with the submission of the decision guidance document, actually with the sharing of the decision guidance document with the parties, the PIC procedure officially starts, and the countries are supposed to start submitting the import decisions to the Secretariat. And in terms of the structure of the DGD, it has 4 sections and 4 annexes. And the basis of the DGD is basically the notifications that were submitted by the notifying parties that were having certain concerns regarding the human health or environment, regarding the chemical that they notified to the Secretariat. In the first section, basically refers to the identifies the chemicals and its uses, then the reason for its inclusion in the PIC procedure. That information comes from the notification form from the submitting notifying parties, protective measures in relation to the chemical, and then hazard and risk to human health and environment. In the 4 annexes, we have additional information on the substance that can be found in the supporting documents from the notifying parties and collected by the Secretariat. In the Annex 2 are provided the details on each of the final regulatory actions submitted to the Secretariat, and then is providing the addresses of all the designated national authorities. And then in the Annex 4, there are certain references that help to develop the decision guidance document. And in terms of how the PIC procedure works, the second aspect, as I already mentioned, is the submission of import responses. The import responses can be submitted in two ways, basically through a final decision or through an interim response or an interim decision. What's important to be mentioned is that if the parties are about to fully benefit from unwanted imports, they should basically submit the import decision to the Secretariat within 9 months period after the dispatch of the decision guidance document. The import response can be changed at any time, no matter whether initial decision was final or interim, or whether the initial submission was consent or no consent. The decisions submitted by the parties are not engraved in stone. They can be changed at any time, but as soon as the change is done, they need to be resubmitted to the Secretariat. What is also important to be mentioned is that import decisions are submitted by the designated national authorities, although they need to comprise proper stakeholder consultation at national level before the designated national authorities submit the import decision to the Secretariat. So now I'm providing a couple of examples based on the import responses form that is basically revealing the Article 10 requirements in the way it's structured and what the countries are required to submit to the Secretariat. I am focusing on Section 4 and Section 5, which is basically whether it's based on the fact whether the import decision is final decision or interim decision. If we are talking about final decision, in that case, this section is addressing the final decision and it applies only when there is an existing national, legislative or administrative measure in the party. So the response can be no consent to import. And in this case, the response should apply equally to all imports from any source, whether we are talking about parties and non-parties, and to domestic production for domestic use. That means that the convention is trade neutral, and if the country submits import response as no consent to import, is not allowed to import the chemical from any other source, and in the same time, the domestic production of the chemical is also prohibited. And in this case, in the two subsequent questions below section 4.1, the country, if the response is no consent to import, shall respond yes, or shall tick the boxes in both questions yes. And then considering the fact that the import responses when it's final decision is based on the already existing national legislative or administrative measure, shall in section 4.4 shall include this information. And in this case, I'm providing the example that is also not a secret, is available in the convention website under the respective section under import responses submitted by the parties, that, for example, this substance is not included in the state catalog of the pesticides and agrochemicals that were approved for the use in the territory of the Russian Federation. That means that if the country has not registered that particular chemical for which it submits import response, in that case, logically, consequentially, the import response should be no consent to import. On the other way, if, let's say, that chemical for which the party is submitting import decision is registered or exists in the National Register of Chemicals, that means it's already in use, normally the chemical, the import decision is consent to import, and the country is ticking the section 4.2 as consent to import. That means the party is allowing import of in this case, let's say we are talking about ethylene oxide of that chemical in the country. And then the third option under final decision is consent to import, but only subject to specified condition. And in this case, the country, for example, can provide an exemption according to which specified condition would allow import of that particular pesticide, in this case, or chemical, let's say DDT for public health use, or for example, country can require an import permit for each shipment in order the regulators can to monitor the chemicals that are imported at national level. So these are three options that are available under Section 4 as a final decision, and basically the same options are available under interim response. No consent to import, and consent to import only under specified conditions. But in this case, is not the difference between final decision and interim response is the fact that the party is not required to have already existing national legislative or administrative measure for that particular chemical or pesticide for which it wants to submit import decision. And in that case, if there is no such a provision at national level, it can submit the import response to the Secretariat immediately, not really waiting for this kind of national decision to be taken. However, as well, in this case, the response applies equally to all imports from any source, both parties and non-parties, and also to the domestic production for domestic use of the chemical. That means in this aspect as well, according to the WTO regulations, the convention is trade neutral. The second example, consent to import, and the third example, consent to import only subject to specified conditions. Here, there are additional questions to which the party can respond, reflecting the Article 10 of the Convention. Basically, whether there is a requested assistant required from the Secretariat. Let's say, in this case, we are talking about import response from a party that submit import decision about ethylene oxide, and they were asking additional help from the Secretariat whether potential alternatives from the medical domain are available. Then the same provision in Section 5.5 is provided if the country wants to obtain additional information from the notifying party, and they are asking that information on potential alternatives from the medical domain to the notifying party through the submission of the form. That, as a responsibility, falls under the Secretariat that needs to share this information with the notifying party, and potentially lies with the notifying party that could submit this information or provide this information to the requesting party. And in the same time, it can ask for technical assistance from the Secretariat in terms of evaluation of the chemical for which they are supposed to submit import decision. And in this case, also the party is asking technical assistance in order to take the final decision and to submit that final decision to the Secretariat. However, in terms of validity, there is no difference between the final decision and interim decision. Exporting parties should comply with import response, despite the fact it's interim response or final decision in terms of validity, in terms of compliance on the part of the exporting parties that potentially would want to export Annex 3 listed chemicals to the importing party in this case. So in terms of what does the Secretariat do with this information, basically it's publishing it in the PIC circular. As you may already know, the PIC circular is key document for the operation of the PIC procedure. and serves as a mechanism for information exchange of the convention. Is published 2 times biannually, 12th of June and 12th of December, and afterwards is shared to all the parties and all the designated national authorities as main stakeholders. It's available and is accessible also online, and basically it serves as a historiographical memory of the convention, which is updated every 6 months. Based on the activities of the parties. That means each new INPO decision submitted to the Secretariat is being published in the following PIC circular, or the same counts for the submission of severely hazardous pesticide formulations, proposals, or notifications of final regulatory action. We have 6 appendices in the PIC circular, and the one that is of our concern, Appendix 4, lists all the import responses that are received from the parties. And this information can be used by the exporters to determine whether export is allowed. And also, in terms of failure list to submit import decision, it can be used by the exporters that they cannot, when they cannot send potential chemical listed in Annex 3 without restriction. And also the failure list serves as a reminder to parties to submit responses, and I will get back to that later in the following slides. What is important to be shared also is that we have Appendix 6 of the PIC circular, which was developed to facilitate information exchange on chemicals that have been recommended for listing in Annex 3. We have a couple of COP decisions that are supporting this, the development of this Appendix 6 in relation to paragraph 1 of Article 14, which refers to information exchange. And in Part A, basically, of the PIC circular, countries can provide information on management of the chemicals recommended by the chemical review for listing, but not yet listed. We have a couple of chemicals like acetochlor, carbosulfan, pentyne, paraquat dichloride formulations, chrysotile asbestos, for which the COP has not yet found consensus to allow listing into the Annex 3. And in order countries to be informed about their national decision and national management processes regarding these chemicals, we are sharing this information in the PIC circular. And even more important, we have Part B of the PIC Appendix 6, which basically provides the chance for the countries on a voluntary basis to submit import responses. We want to raise the awareness to all the parties that it's very important also to submit import decisions, not only for the Annex 3 listed chemicals, as required in Article 10 of the Convention, but also to these chemicals for which the CRC has recommended listing, but they are not yet listed pending COP final decision. And up until now, we have received import decisions for only for from a couple of countries for these 5-6 chemicals pending listing, like from Canada, EU, and Switzerland on chrysotile asbestos. Qatar has submitted voluntary import response on paraquat formulations, and Nigeria on pentyne. So we expect that in future this will be also our effort to promote the voluntary submission of import decision will be fruitful, and the countries or parties will start submitting import decisions also for these chemicals recommended for listing. With this, these 2 slides, I want to share with you the schematic depiction of what does it mean or how important is the submission of import responses in terms of custom authorities as an important stakeholder or part of the PIC procedure or following the PIC procedure obligations under the convention. For example, if we are talking about PIC chemical that is supposed to be imported in the country, if it's a PIC chemical, customs, for example, should check the import response for that PIC chemical. They can basically contact the designated national authority, or they can check the PIC circular or the database available in the convention website. If we are not talking about the PIC chemical, customs shall check the national decision on import for that chemical and consider if the chemical is exported from a party or is not exported from a party. If it's not exported from a party, in this case, there is no specific provision under the convention. On the other hand, if the chemical that is being imported in the party, it's exported from another party, customs authorities potentially shall contact the designated national authority to find out if the chemical is banned or severely restricted in the exporting party. And in that case, if that's the case, that means if the chemical is banned or is severely restricted, it needs to be accompanied by export notification in accordance to Article 12. And in the same time, customs together, authorities or the border controls customs authorities with the designated national authority should work together with the DNA to verify if the chemical is accompanied with information, adequate information as required in Article 13 of the Convention. That means labeling requirements, that means provision of the safety data sheet, etc. And if the chemical is not banned or severely restricted in the exporting party, there are no specific provisions under the Convention. And then in terms of export of chemicals that are part of the Annex 3, if it's a PIC chemical, what would be the process followed in relation to the communication between the custom authorities and the designated national authorities if that chemical is being exported from their side? If we're talking about PIC chemical, customs should inform the DNA that a PIC chemical is being exported. And if it's not a PIC chemical, customs shall contact the designated national authority to find out if the chemical is banned or severely restricted at national level. If that's the case, that means the customs and the DNA should work together to see if, again, the export notification is accompanying that chemical, in this case, which is not part of the Annex 3 list. And if we are talking about, and in the same time, it to be accompanied with the adequate information as required in Article 13 of the Convention. I'm talking about export notification in accordance to Article 12. If you're talking about the first time export in the year, in that case, the countries are supposed to follow up with the export notification to the importing party if you're not talking about Annex 3 illicit chemical. And if you're talking about chemical that is not part of the Annex 3 list and the chemical is not banned or severely restricted in the exporting party, there are no specific provisions under the Convention. So what is also important to be mentioned is the so-called failure list or list of chemicals for which countries are still missing to submit import decisions. 2 or 3 weeks ago, the Secretariat has sent out email with the attachment to all the designated national authorities, both pesticides specific and industrial chemical specific, for which, and this email was containing the failure list for the specific countries still missing to submit import decisions. We want to address this with the parties and to raise the awareness on the fact that still quite a number of countries are not submitting the missing import responses to the Secretariat. This information, as I mentioned, can be found in a PIC circular. It can be found in the database of import response in the website under procedures. You can see here there are 3 tabs, and the 3rd tab contains the cases of failure to submit import response. And if you click in the 4th tab, you can filter the missing import responses by chemical, where you have the list of all the countries missing import decisions for that particular chemical, or you can click on the country itself and you can get the drop-down menu list with all the missing import responses for that particular party. We are glad that countries started submitting import decision after we did this send out a couple of weeks ago. And this is important, let's say, to be mentioned that also that by 31st of October, when is the cutoff date for the PIC circular, we will expect still submission of import decisions from your side to the Secretariat, and those will be published in the next 54th edition of the PIC circular. In the next couple of slides, I just want to provide you some short, and this presentation later on will be shared with you, and you can see what's the actual status per PIC region. We have 7 PIC regions listing all the countries, all the parties and non-parties, and you can see all the parties that have let's say full success of submission of import responses. That means they have submitted all 53 import responses. And as going down this list, yeah, the number of these import responses is falling. We can see the overall rate of submitted import responses for Latin American and Caribbean region, where we have 70% submission rate. Then Asia region, where we have 73% submission rate. Southwest Pacific region, where we have 54% submission rate. Then import responses of Africa region, where we have 52% submission rate. Europe is doing the best so far. We have 96% submission rate. Near East region, close to 70% submission rate, and North America with only one party, 100%. So yeah, the idea of this this webinar is basically to remind you and to raise the awareness among you as designated national authorities and other stakeholders to check the website, check the PIC circular, check what is missing in terms of non-submitted import decision, or check the failure list. Contact the Secretariat if there are certain problems or certain help or assistance is needed for a specific help to submit these import responses, because we don't see a reason a party that has joined the convention for so many years is still lagging behind in terms of submission of import decisions in accordance to Article 10. I would pass the floor now. Thank you for your attention. I would pass the floor now to Suman. We need to hear the designated national authority from Serbia, Ms. Suzana Andrejević-Stefanović. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alec, for your wonderful presentation. Now I would like to, I said in the beginning that after each presentation, we will open floor for question and answer. But, I just thought that maybe it is a good idea if we ask Suzana to make her presentation, and then we can handle questions jointly. Will that be okay with everybody? Unless there is a serious reservation, I would rather give floor to Suzana now. Suzana, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Do we hear each other? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, colleagues, but also good morning and good evening to everybody. My name is Suzana Andrejević-Stefanović. I'm head of division for chemicals management in the Ministry of Environmental Protection of the Republic of Serbia, but also I'm DNA for Rotterdam Convention in the Republic of Serbia for almost 12 years. I would like to thank Secretariat for inviting me to participate in this webinar, and it is my pleasure to be here today and to present national implementation of the PIC procedure in the Republic of Serbia. So I will now share a screen with my presentation. Do you see my presentation? Yes, okay. So I can begin now. This is the slide where you can see the content of my presentation. First, I will talk about status of implementation of the Rotterdam Convention in the Republic of Serbia. Then about our national legislation, the procedure which we conduct for export and import, and also export-import control in Serbia. Institution which is responsible for chemicals management in the Republic of Serbia is Ministry of Environmental Protection, with the Department for Chemicals as the central administration. The law on chemicals is the umbrella law for the chemicals management in the Republic of Serbia, and the main objective of the law on chemicals was to establish the unique system of chemicals management in Serbia, which was done. The law on chemicals is in force since 2009, and every day we work on maintenance and improvement of that system. Also to assure the high level of human health and environment protection, to improve the free trade of chemicals with the EU and other countries. Rotterdam Convention also has its own objectives. We all know them. This is to promote shared responsibility and efforts among parties in the international trade of hazardous chemicals. And of course, again, in order to protect human health and the environment from potential harm, and also to contribute to their environmentally sound use. And how to achieve these objectives? First, by facilitating information exchange about characteristics of hazardous chemicals, which we do when we conduct procedures. Also certain documents with information on characteristic of hazardous chemicals are provided. Then also by providing for a national decision-making process on their import and export responses, and of course by disseminating these decisions to other parties through the Secretariat and PIC circular. Republic of Serbia ratified the Rotterdam Convention in 2009, became a party of the convention, and regulatory mechanism in the Republic of Serbia are the law on ratification of the convention, law on chemicals, which I mentioned, and rule book on import and export of certain hazardous chemicals, which is sub-legal act to law on chemicals. Later on, I will mention other legal acts which are also important for the implementation of the convention. Rotterdam Convention prescribes certain obligations for parties. One of them, according to Article 4, is to designate national authority to perform the administrative function required by this convention. In the Republic of Serbia, Ministry of Environmental Protection is the designated institution, and I'm the contact person. And these contact details are available on the website of the Rotterdam Convention. Also, important obligation, which is today's topic, are according to Article 10, the obligation of each party to timely deliver to the Secretariat a response concerning the future import of the chemical listed in Annex 3 of the Convention. Republic of Serbia submitted import responses for all chemicals and pesticides that are in Annex 3 of the Convention. And according to our national legislation, law on chemicals, import responses are prepared based on certain legal acts. When we talk about industrial chemicals, we prepare import responses based on bans and restrictions of manufacturing, placing on the market and use of chemicals, which is in line with Annex 17 of REACH regulation. This is the EU legal act. When we talk about pesticides, plant protection products, then it's pursuant to act which allows placing on the market of plant protection products, or when we talk about biocidal products, it's pursuant to act which allows placing on the market of biocidal products. And it is also stated by the law that when it comes to plant protection products, we have to cooperate with Plant Protection Directorate, which is the institution responsible for plant protection products. And when it comes to biocidal products, we cooperate with our colleagues, which is in organization units with the same department where I work, Department for Chemicals, in the Ministry of Environmental Protection, but they're responsible for biocidal products management. And also here you can see the main legal acts which are important when we prepare import responses. Also, according to Article 5 of the Rotterdam Convention, the obligation of each party is to timely deliver to the Secretariat notification of final regulatory action for banned or severely restricted chemical on national level. Republic of Serbia submitted notification of final regulatory action for 10 banned or severely restricted chemicals, but more notification are in the process of preparation. And we can say that chemicals are banned or restricted in the Republic of Serbia in the process of harmonization of national legislation with the EU legislation. When I mentioned EU legislation, this is important considering the status of Republic of Serbia and its commitment to harmonize its national legislation also with EU legislation. Besides being a party, of course, to the Rotterdam Convention. We have to mention also EU regulation concerning export and import of hazardous chemicals, which implements the Rotterdam Convention on EU level. And our national legislation is harmonized with the PIC regulation to the maximum extent for the country that is not an EU member. I mentioned previously these legal acts, which are the main legal acts for the implementation of provision regarding export and import in the Republic of Serbia, but besides them, also the important legal acts are law on biocidal products, when we talk about export and import of biocidal products, law on plant protection products, and for industrial chemical rule book on bans and restrictions of manufacturing, placing on the market, and use of chemicals. Our law on chemicals, our umbrella law for chemicals management, also for, of course, export and import, prescribes the obligation of exporter to conduct certain procedures. These are notification procedure or PIC procedure before import or export of a banned or restricted chemical in the Republic of Serbia. But also law prescribes the manner of conducting procedure and some other obligations of exporters and importers, like reporting obligations and the export ban of certain hazardous chemicals. These procedures that I mentioned, notification procedure and prior informed consent procedure, are conducted for certain categories of chemicals. This categorization is a little bit broader than it is in the Rotterdam Convention. The main categorization is to industrial chemicals and to pesticides, including biocidal products. But also there are subcategories. For industrial chemicals are chemicals intended for general public and intended for professional use. Considering pesticides, subcategories are plant protection products and other pesticides like biocidal products. Law on chemicals also prescribes exemption to the application, which are the same as in the convention. This is our sub-legal act, which closely defines, regulates the procedures and the deadlines within which these procedures, notification procedure and prior informed procedures, are carried out, and when they doesn't have to be carried out. And also the documentation which has to be submitted and the content of export notification which is prepared by the ministry. So when we talk about notification procedure, when exporter wants to export the chemical, which is on the list of chemicals subject to notification procedure, they have to prepare certain documentation and to conduct this procedure before export. This number is number of chemicals which is on the list of chemicals subject to notification procedure. But there are some exceptions. This procedure doesn't have to be conducted if the designated authority of the importing country informed the ministry as the DNA of exporting country that the export of that certain chemical does not require the conduction of the procedure, or if the chemical is in the Annex 3 of the convention and the authority of importing countries submitted import response to the Secretariat, which is distributed to other countries through PIC circular. This is the scheme in which I'm trying to explain a little bit more how does it work in practice, the notification procedure. So when exporter wants to export the chemical, he looks in our legal act to see if that chemical is on the list of chemicals subject to notification procedure. If the chemical is not on the list, the procedure doesn't have to be conducted. But if the chemical is on the list, then the exporter should prepare the documentation which is prescribed, the request, then information about export and import, importer, exporter, the quantity of chemical, the date of the export, also the safety data sheet, which consists of data on characteristic of hazardous chemicals, and to pay tax. And they should provide those documentation to the ministry the latest 35 days before planned export. Based on that data, ministry is preparing an export notification which sends to, along with safety data sheet, to the DNA of importing country 15 days before export. Immediately when it sends, we are preparing acknowledgement. This is the act, which means that, which proves that the procedure is conducted, and it is sent to the exporter. And exporter can export the chemical, but we are waiting to receive from the DNA of importing country the acknowledgement of the receipt of the export notification, because it is very important for us to know that the DNA of importing country is notified about the planned export. This is the main mean of that procedure. Because of that, it is called notification procedure. We notified the DNA of importing country that we plan to export, the exporter from our country plan to export the chemical to their country. If we don't receive the answer in 30 days, we send reminder and wait for answer to be sure that DNA of importing country received our notification. When it comes to prior informed consent procedure or PIC procedure, also our legal act contain a list of chemicals subject to PIC procedure. So this list is divided in two parts. One of them are chemicals listed in Annex 3 of the convention. And if exporter wants to export the chemical which is on that list, they also should conduct this procedure. But there is also exemption. It doesn't have to be conducted for the chemical from the Annex 3 of the convention if export is in the category which is not on the list, or if a party to the convention submitted an import response to the Secretariat, which is distributed to all the country through PIC circular. This is also the scheme like in previous situation. When exporter wants to export the chemical, which is on the list of chemicals subject to PIC procedure, they prepare this documentation and send it to the ministry as the DNA of exporting country. Ministry is preparing requests for explicit consent because these are the chemicals that can be exported only if we receive the consent from the DNA of importing country. So this request for explicit consent, along with safety data sheet, ministry sends to the DNA of importing country and wait for the response. If doesn't receive response in 30 days, DNA of exporting country, the ministry sends the reminder to the DNA of importing country and wait for the response. When we receive the response from the DNA of importing country, we also prepare the acknowledgement, the act, to the exporter, where we put the response of the DNA of importing country. The response can be that exporter is allowed to export the chemical to that country, or it is not allowed to export. And also the period of time in which exporter can export the chemical in that country. And this acknowledgement we provide to exporter, and exporter is obliged to comply with the DNA response, the DNA of importing country. So it can export the chemical if we receive consent. If we we receive no consent, they cannot export the chemical. Also, like in Article 13 of the Convention, exporter have certain obligations related to exports. This is to pack and label the chemical which is aimed for export in accordance with our legislation governing classification, packaging and labeling, or in accordance with the international standards, unless importing country requires that. And also exporter have to submit safety data sheets to the importer, and where possible, that safety data sheet shall be in the language of the importing country. I mentioned when I explained the procedure, prior informed consent procedure, that DNA of importing country puts the period of time in which exporter can export the chemical to that country. The maximum is 3 years, and after that time, the procedure has to be conducted again. That means that we have to ask again that country if they still allow the export of that chemical in their country. Also, according to our legislation, exporter and importer, they have a reporting obligation to submit certain data about imported and exported chemicals, then country of import and export, and general data on importer and exporter on annual basis. To have proper implementation of all of these provisions, we have import-export control. It's customs and inspection supervision. So the customs authority examines whether the notification or PIC procedure has been conducted. Exporters are obliged to show the acknowledgement that they received from the ministry when they export the chemical to the customs authority. Regarding inspection supervision, inspector establish control if exporter prior to export provided the information for the conduction of the procedure, and if they carries out the prescribed reporting. Also, the law prescribes penal provisions for the legal entity, which should be fined for committing economic offenses. And this is the last slide, which shows that for the proper implementation of the convention, it's not only one institution We are, of course, the central one, Ministry of Environmental Protection, Department for Chemicals, which are national Rotterdam Convention DNA, but we also have to cooperate with all the other institutions which I mentioned. This is for plant protection products, plant protection directorate, with division for biocidal products risk management, which is also in our ministry. Of course, this is our environmental inspection and customs authority. To have proper implementation of the convention, it's very important that all of these institutions be involved in this process. Thank you very much for your attention.